Hello and welcome to Crosstalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. On this edition of Crosstalk, we answer questions sent to us by you, the viewers. We received quite a few questions. Here, we do our best to answer some of them. Cross-talking fan mail. I'm joined by my guest, Robert Bridge. He's an RT website writer. We also have Dmitry Babich. He is a political analyst and editor at InterestMe Internet Media Project. And in London, we cross to Marcus Papadopoulos. He's the editor of Politics First magazine. All right, gentlemen, crosstalk rules in effect. That means you can jump in anytime you want, and I always appreciate it. We got a lot of questions sent to us. We're not going to be able to answer them all, but I'll get the worst one out of the way and go to Marcus first about this here. Okay, we have a question from Adrian Holman. Question, pretty obvious. Will Donald Trump be eventually removed from office? Go ahead. As we go into the new year, the impeachment saga continues. Go ahead, Marcus.
Personally, I find it very difficult to believe, Peter, that Donald Trump will be removed from office. I think that Republicans are very unlikely to vote for his impeachment. It's more likely, if anything, that Donald Trump could resign. But nonetheless, I think that Donald Trump will go into 2020 as president. I think he will fight the November 2020 presidential election. And I believe that attempts by the liberal elite within the American establishment to bring him down, to impeach him, will fail.
Yeah, I do agree too. Okay, I think that's a given here. Let's go to Fabian Perez. Dima, interesting question, more up your alley here. Is Macron, the French president, realigning with Eurasia? Interesting question.
Well, I don't think so. I think we shouldn't be reading too much into his statement about the brain death of NATO.
So don't take the French president seriously?
Don't take this phrase seriously, because it was obvious that Macron decided to play the liberal game. You know, everyone is allowed to insult Trump, so he decided to insult him too. And he went a little too much, a little too far in his criticism, because
we saw Angela Merkel pull him back
exactly.
A little bit,
she immediately pulled him back, by his sleeves, by his collar. Yeah, and basically the message from Merkel and from the EU was that attack this man, but don't attack the institution. We need the institution so that we can basically wage a few more wars. And if we analyze Macron's statements, a lot of them are basically pretty aggressive against Russia. I mean, his suggestion to have a new European army, united European army, he first said about the Russian danger, and then in the end he mentioned China and Trump.
Don't you think this is more of a kind of a Napoleonic urge on his part here? I don't take it very seriously.
But let's remember, Europe had in new history, in recent history, there were 2 times when Europe had a unified single army, under Napoleon and under Hitler. Both times that army attacked Russia.
And they failed.
It didn't like the Anglo-Saxon, but it disliked Russians even more.
So save this space here. Let's go to another question here. I want to ask Robert here. We have Margomed Asayev. Does Russia see itself turning communism by deepening its relations with China? I ask you that question for a very good reason, is because there is this perception, and it's peddled by the mainstream media, that nothing ever really changes in Russia. And of course, things have. I mean, you and I have lived here for a very long time, and we have our Russian friend as a Sherpa to help us understand it here.
Longer.
That's right. But just because Russia has a growing relationship with China doesn't mean it's ideological. Go ahead.
I think that's kind of like the same as saying that the United States is turning communist because we're doing business with Beijing.
Well, look at the presidential candidates, okay? The Democrats, okay?
They are reinforcing that idea. I mean, Trump had to actually get up and say in front of the Congress, we will never become a socialist country, because there is that tendency from the progressive far left. We're heading in that direction slowly, but that's a different story.
I would like to just throw in there, I don't think people in the United States, when they talk about socialism, have any idea what they're talking about. Yes. This is just a label that has been thrown around. It's been thrown around in American politics as something taboo. When we get down to it, some of the things that proposals and people would agree with it to say, but that's socialism. So what you do is you give it what in marketing they call a halo effect. Okay, so I really hate that conversation about communism here. Let's quickly move on to another question because I really appreciate viewers sending them in. Linda Ward asks, and I think this is a very interesting question. This is for Marcus in London. Has the EU deserted Christianity and traditional family values? And if so, why? Go ahead, Marcus.
Not officially, but of course the European Union, Britain, America, and indeed most of the world has now adopted a corporate capitalist ideology. And corporate capitalism, and in my own opinion, capitalism per se, rots the soul of a nation because capitalism makes people adopt materialism. It makes people put materialism over spiritualism. So it's not that the EU is doing anything different to what is happening in America or in Britain or indeed in Australia. That is the nature of corporate capitalism. And I think it is very sad. I think it's very dangerous. I think the fabric of society in the West has been eroded because of corporate capitalism. And it is therefore refreshing to see that more and more people are looking to alternative ideologies.
You know, stay with Linda Ward's question here, Robert, because I think it is really important. And I'll give my own humble opinion here, which, of course, it's my program, so I'm going to do it. But there is a concerted attack on family values and the family itself. And I think this is something that's tearing the fabric of society apart in the West. And I know the West the best. And this is the foundation of Western civilization in the modern times. And there's a concerted attack on it. And I don't see anything good coming from it. Because you know why? Because no one's happy. Everyone ends up being miserable as a result. Robert.
Yeah, I think it has a lot to do with, well, number one, materialism, and number two, the influx of, maybe some people would disagree with me, but the influx of illegal migrants into Europe, that I think has had an incredible effect on the family structure. I mean, they're kicking people out of their apartments so that illegal migrants can live there. They're cutting back on stipends for families so that they can give more money to these illegal migrants. So and now that you have these Christmas festivities that are happening in town squares, and these have been going on for hundreds of years without any problem. And now you have, they have to set up anti-terrorist bunkers around these little Christmas bazaars where people, once celebrated for generations without any question.
Well, I think that transnational companies, multinationals, are involved here because they need a new man. Just, like Nazis talked about a new man.
Well, don't they want to displace the current demographic to replace it where we have more pliant, quote-unquote, voters?
Yes.
It's, again, all in the name of democracy.
The ideal worker for a multinational is a human transformer, someone without a family whom you can send to Africa today, to China tomorrow. He or she feels absolutely the same in all these places.
If they want to have children, it's a bad idea.
That's a bad idea. You can have children. We can freeze your cells and then give you a child without a husband when you are 40. So it's easier for us than to have things happening unpredictably. But this is against human nature. And, this idea that every human should constantly change itself, This is the reason why there is so much talk about transgenders. I have nothing against homosexuals or people having peculiarities. They were born that way. But this is the idea of multinationals. Change yourself. Upgrade yourself every day. This way you will live for 300 or 400 years. Transhumanism. These are all dangerous ideas because in the end, we are not getting humans. We are getting some kind of new species, and pretty ugly to my mind.
Okay, let's go back to Marcus. Another question from one of our viewers, Gamal Michal Sidum. He asked, is Saudi Arabia really changing, or is it purely for show? We've done a lot of programs on Saudi Arabia, primarily because of the anti-Western campaign against Iran and the genocidal war being waged against Yemen. What about Saudi Arabia? Go ahead, Marcus.
Saudi Arabia is an autocratic state, and its official creed, Wahhabism, is not just wicked, it's not just depraved, it is obscene. Therefore, based on those two realities, it is impossible for Saudi Arabia to reform. It's no different to saying, for example, Christianity per se, capitalism per se, communism per se are not evil, but evil deeds have been done in the name of capitalism, Christianity, and communism. But Wahhabism, all you need to do is read about the principles, the tenets of Wahhabism, and you will see that this is an evil ideology. And with an evil ideology in place in a country entrenched in power, it is simply impossible.
But Marcus, you never hear that in the mainstream media. Saudi Arabia is a valued ally in the Middle East, like Israel. They're on par, okay? I mean, but what does that say about the consciousness of the political elites in the West?
There are politicians in Britain and America and journalists in Britain and America, whether they are liberal or conservative, have no moral compunction with aligning themselves with any government, with any organization, with any group, provided that country, that group, or that organization support American and British geostrategic objectives. And Saudi Arabia, yes, is a very important friend and ally to America and Britain, but it is the most repugnant country in the world.
Okay, Dima, if I can interject here before we go to the break, but it's Russia's fault and China's fault that Assad is still in power in Damascus.
Let me interject just one thought here. Without Western support and without the initiative from the West, wars in Yemen and in Syria would not have begun. It was not Saudi Arabia that started them. It was the West that kind of pushed Saudi Arabia and other states into doing this.
Okay, I'm going to jump in here. We're going to go to a short break, and after that short break, we'll continue our program on Crosstalk Fan Mail. Stay with RT. Welcome back to Crosstalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lindell. To remind you, we're discussing some questions we received from our viewers. Okay, and the next question from one of our viewers, Donovan McCormick, and this is right up your alley, Dima. It's something you talk about almost every single program, and actually Marcus Papadopoulos talks about it a lot here. So a little lengthy, but I'm going to go through it. What do you think the future of NATO looks like with its apparent mission pivot and all of the disagreements between the United States and other members, especially the Turks? Do you believe the Turks will make good on their threat to remove U.S. military airbase, home of U.S. warheads, and let another NATO army take the base? Go ahead.
Well, the problem with the ultra-liberal ideology is that it makes people quarrel, you know. It's just amazing how they accuse Russians of sowing discord in the United States between blacks and whites, between,
young
sexual
and
minorities.
old or whatever.
As if the liberal media did not do it itself, all the time. So the same story with NATO. We see a real inability to resolve conflicts because we see inability for compromise. Unfortunately, there is totally inability for compromise also in the Turkish case. Just a few years ago, in 2012, NATO was saying we need to protect Turkey from Syrian aggression. I'm quoting the New York Times, which was absurd because Syria was suffering from a civil war itself. How could it attack Turkey?
It was brought on from the outside.
Yeah, but also a Turkish fighter jet was downed by Syrian air defense because that fighter jet breached the Syrian airspace, and it was viewed as a casus belli. The people in France, in London, were talking about the need to protect Turkey. Now, this year, I just couldn't believe my ears. I couldn't believe my eyes. Turkey is attacking Syria. It's occupying the territories of our allies. So suddenly the narrative turned completely in a different direction. So of course in this situation you have conflicts. And of course you have conflicts between Turkey and European allies, Turkey and the United States. Unless they change their ideology, there will be a collapse of NATO.
What you have is you have NATO in its reasons to exist, which is to exist. That's its mission, is to exist. But you have Turkey that's really turning to a kind of a neo-Ottomanism here.
Well,
Marcus, let me go to Marcus in London.
Is
that compatible here? Because we just recently had the NATO summit, and of course, Western media, they just, smooth all the edges and all the crevices. Everything's a big, happy family, and it's going to protect the West from all these evil outside forces, which of course don't really exist. And then you have this Turkish behavior, Erdogan, doing basically spitting in everybody's eye. But no, everything's all nice and fine with the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. I mean, media, again, is shameful in its coverage of this. Go ahead, Marcus.
Peter, there's a lot of naivety amongst commentators in the West and also in Russia regarding Turkey. No Turkish leader will do anything to weaken Turkey's strategic relationship with the West, with America, with Britain, and with NATO. It would be national suicide for Turkey to do anything that could cause it to leave the West's orbit. Turkey is in Cyprus illegally because of the blank check it receives from America. Turkey is in Syria illegally because of the blank check it receives from America. Turkey goes into Iraq illegally because of the blank check it receives from America.
And now we have Libya coming up.
Yes. What Erdogan says in public, Peter, is very different to what he says in private. In public, he has to come across as this strong leader. He's telling the Turkish people, no one will tell me what to do. In private, of course, he's saying things very different to the Americans. If Erdogan wants to make good on his pledge that Turkey is independent and will do as it pleases, then leave NATO, tell the Americans to pack up their military bases there, tell the Americans to withdraw their nuclear warheads. But of course, he's not going to do that. The Turkish state is unbelievably dependent on.
So what you're saying, Marcus, is that the Western alliance needs Turkey more than Turkey needs the Western alliance. Is that what you're saying? That's the kind of leverage they have.
For Turkey's survival, for Turkey's power that it exerts today in the Eastern Mediterranean and in the Middle East, that is based on its relationship with the West. But also the West gains massively through its influence in Turkey, through its strategic relationship with Turkey. It's able to spy on Russia from the Black Sea. It's able to cement its hold over the Middle East and in the Eastern Mediterranean. So Turkey is firmly entrenched in the West's orbit.
They're so entrenched they can be extremely mischievous, and that's exactly what we're seeing from Erdogan. Let's go on and have another question here. Jonathan asks, the U.S.-China deal would suggest a compromise is possible, but there is a cost. And it's a question, is there a cost to Chinese sovereignty, Robert? Because what you see now is that, what we've seen, I think 2019 in many ways was a year of sanctions, sanctioning friends and foes here. We had in the middle of the 2019 a tentative trade deal, and the Chinese backed away from it because it was infringing upon their sovereignty. Do you see this new phase one that they're all talking about, being able to take the heat out of this so-called trade war? And does Trump benefit from this? Go ahead.
There's so much to benefit from good relations with China and with China remaining sovereign, and I don't see China ever agreeing to give up any sort of its own sovereignty in order to have a deal with the United States. You have to keep in mind too that the Chinese economy is just unbelievably powerful. They have 400 million people in their middle class. Okay. Second amount of wealthy people, super rich people, oligarchs or billionaires in the world. So this is a part of the world that Trump there's no way they could sacrifice.
Ready for globalization. China is much better prepared for globalization than the United States.
Why? Why is that the case? Because it is a command
simply because they are not straitjacketed by this neoliberal ideology, and because China is a powerful nation, with a huge potential. I think no one doubts that. But the point is that the pressure from Trump was so shameless. It put even Obama to shame because, well, look, the pressure on China did not start with Trump. When Obama suggested Trans-Pacific Partnership, TPP, without Russia and China.
Which was intentional.
Mm-hmm. It was intentional, and it was, of course, anti-Chinese. But the Chinese, knowing that they are so able to compete, they're almost bending backwards, not to insult the United States, not to step on their interests. So it was definitely not China who started this trade war. It was the West. It was the
Marcus,
United States.
reflect upon that, because I think that's going to be one of the very big stories. I mean, of course, we have impeachment and we have the U.S. presidential election coming up, but so much else is happening in the world, and so little media time is given to it. But China will continue to be demonized if the U.S. doesn't perceive it as a victory. I mean, this is the problem that I see, is that the U.S. has a very hard time compromising, and it never believes it has to compromise with a power that is perceived as weaker. But China is a different case. It's very, very different. And depending on who you want to ask, it's either they have parity in economic strength and GDP, or it's more or less the same, and China will continue to accelerate, but maybe at a slower pace. But this story is not going to go away. And I just have to wonder, given the poor track record of quote-unquote compromise or diplomacy here, the U.S. is going to be running into a very big brick wall because, as Robert pointed out, I don't see them compromising their sovereignty. Go ahead, Marcus.
China will never compromise its sovereignty through its dealings with America, through its dealings with Russia, indeed, through its dealings with any country in the world. But the Chinese leadership are acutely aware that its economic progress in the last 40 years since Deng Xiaoping, which has been nothing short of a miracle, has been based overwhelmingly on its trade and investment relationship with America. So the Chinese leadership really need to start to diversify its economy in terms of who it's trading with in the world. It needs to move away from its overwhelming dependence on America. And therein lies China's economic Achilles heel. And the Americans know that. The Americans, of course, if there was a major disruption in the economic relationship between Washington and Beijing, of course, America would suffer immensely. But Peter, China would suffer far more because its relationship is centered overwhelmingly on its trade and investment relationship with America. So that is where the problem lies for China, not Chinese sovereignty, but its economic progress, and its economic progress in the future.
I would, Marcus, I take a bit issue with that when we have this Belt and Road Initiative, which is encompassing the majority of the countries of the world right now. I think that stressing the Chinese-American relationship is overdone, because I think the Chinese see so many more opportunities, and people that want to come to the table, that do want the investment of China into infrastructure. I mean, the greatest juxtaposition, of course, is the U.S. sends troops all over the world. The Chinese build bridges and ports and factories. That is a competitive advantage in the long term, and the Chinese know it. And I think the Americans are very slow to wake up to that. Marcus, I'll give you the last 30 seconds of the program. Go ahead.
Well, I just hope going into 2020 there will be a continuation of Russian progress in the world, of Chinese progress in the world. And I do hope that countries such as Cuba and Venezuela and Syria remain independent sovereign countries. And anyone in the world, Peter, who sincerely is committed to global peace and global stability should rejoice through countries such as Russia and China, because no Russia and no China in the world, then America truly is the global master, and that will mean more wars and more abject pain and suffering for people.
Marcus ends this program on a very pessimistic note, but a very realistic one here. Many thanks to my guests here in Moscow and in London, and thanks to our viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time, and remember, crosstalk rules.